Thiess brothers' story is all about building Australia.
What they had was some real values and some real vision of what they wanted to achieve.
If you take on some of the challenges that Thiess have taken on, you've got to have some pretty committed people to deliver.
There is an essence to Thiess.
The absolute can-do attitude of the Thiess brothers that still exists in this company today.
In 1934, five brothers began building a business on Queensland's Darling Downs, moving earth, soil and rock, come rain, hail or shine.
Around this table in the conference room sit the men who guide the destinies of the firm. Mr. Les Thiess, one of a family of 10 sons who started their business cutting chaff on contract, now governing director of all the associated Thiess companies. Mr. Cecil Thiess, manager of the Thiess organisation in Queensland and a director of the Queensland company whose Callide and Blair Athol activities are constantly in the news. Mr. Stan Thiess, a director of Thiess Brothers New South Wales and in charge of the open cut at Muswellbrook. Like all his brothers, he knows the meaning of hard work and enjoys every minute of it. Another director in Queensland, Mr. Bert Thiess, who is also supervisor of the drainage works at Millicent, South Australia, and the railway construction near Singleton, New South Wales. Mr. Alfred Thiess, who directs operations at the open cut at Durham, also in New South Wales.
Together, they were a formidable team, prepared to tackle any opportunity.
In the workshop there, they could make or build just about anything you could think of.
I'm pretty sure it was a dozer that broke down. They didn't have the part that they needed, so they actually took a part out of an old machine, re-engineered it, drove it to the Hunter Valley from Archerfield Airport, reinstalled it into the machine overnight, and had the machine operational by lunchtime the next day.
Nothing was ever a challenge, if you know what I mean.
Even as the country was going through the Great Depression, the brothers' optimism and determination would not be deterred, and Thiess Brothers was incorporated in 1934.
When Thiess had their first job at Kilkeven, they sort of bluffed their way into the project and then had to really sit down and think about how they're going to meet the requirements, move 50,000 cubic yards of material.
That was at the forefront of what contractors were doing at that time. We were really moving from the era of horsepower to mechanical horsepower.
It was gruelling work, but a can-do attitude and a dose of good old-fashioned luck saw the first major triumph for the boys, marking the start of bigger jobs to come.
This one at Heifer Creek, for instance, was one of the first big contracts undertaken with modern equipment.
It's very impressive. It's such a vertical wall through sheer sandstone.
At the time, when it was at 1940, it was unique in how they did it.
Always thinking ahead, Les took it upon himself to order a majestic new Cat bulldozer, Queensland's very first Blade D8.
The D8 dozer was a star.
Bert Thiess actually, I think, drove the D8 most of the way up to Heifer Creek, illegally, I hear.
But the cutting was finished well on schedule.
It's just a milestone in Thiess Brothers' history.
Where there was a will to move dirt, they would definitely find a way to do it.
Word spread. If a job was considered impossible, the brothers got the call. By 1942, World War II had engulfed the Pacific, and the American Allies found themselves on unfamiliar Australian soil. In need of emergency camps and airstrips, but lacking trained men to operate equipment, it was suggested they call Les Thiess.
There was the threat that the brothers would be separated, but Les managed to befriend the American commanders and convince them that the brothers should be allowed to continue to operate as a unit. That was their strength, and the American commanders respected that.
If you look at the history of Thiess, it's always worked closely with its clients and tried to find, a win-win situation.
No nonsense, quick decisions, and the ability to get things done fast worked in their favour. In a matter of months, the brothers managed to orchestrate a band of servicemen to turn Brisbane's Eagle Farm into a major military airport. By 1944, the combination of war and a weakened workforce found Australia in the midst of a crippling coal shortage.
I guess Thiess's foray into mining started in the back end of the war. New South Wales, from an energy perspective, had no coal, burning timber and stuff. The Thiess brothers were commissioned by government back then, firstly at Blair Athol, then at Muswellbrook, to get coal out of the ground to support the economy.
From scrub and forest clearing, from road and railway cuttings, the activities move on to a new sphere. The winning of coal, so vital to many industries.
The Thiess brothers obviously realised that the use of coal as energy on a worldwide scale was probably a growth opportunity.
Coal from Blair Athol is finding a ready market today, and as fast as the scoops and trucks can be filled, they move off in a continuous stream with their precious loads.
With projects spreading further and further around the nation, it became apparent that transport would soon become an issue.
They did have their plane that they newly purchased when I joined the company, and that could get them from point A to point B fairly quickly.
An aircraft was perhaps an unconventional purchase for a business of that era. Nevertheless, she was christened Progress and would serve just that purpose. First stop, New Guinea. By 1945, the war had left a trail of destruction across the Pacific Rim. And yet Les and Bert saw enormous opportunity, a treasure of disfigured heavy machinery.
At the end of the war, the Americans were not going to take their earth-moving equipment back to America, so Les Thiess negotiated a deal.
They spent years tacking back and forth, salvaging parts of transport vehicles, D8 bulldozers, and even scrap metal from bombed bridges.
We did have a few cranes there that had bullet holes and things in them.
The Americans had indicated that there were some items of plant that were not for sale, but the brothers apparently went back out there in the middle of the night and painted the crosses back out again and took the lot anyway.
To suggest that you'd go out and buy a bunch of clapped out second-hand stuff that come from the jungles of New Guinea to start your business, I mean, people would laugh at you, but really that's what they did.
Their purchases were valued at more than £1 million, and a lot of the equipment bought was reconditioned and serviced at their own Queensland workshops.
Once again, their willingness to go out on a limb had turned into both profit and potential. And as man and machine grew in number, the company began to spread its wings. They helped to pioneer Australia's agricultural industry with projects like the Peak Down scheme and made vital connections across the nation with the major beef roads network. But the Snowy hydroelectric scheme was their most ambitious project to date. The magnitude of the project had captured the Australian imagination and the brothers' full attention.
Give me a man who's a man among men, who'll stow his white collar and put down his pen. We'll blow down a mountain and build you a dam, bigger and better than old Uncle Sam. Roll, roll, roll on your way.
The stories of the Snowy were, you know, they were bigger than Ben Hur. And as a young guy, I actually probably didn't believe them when I first heard them.
Thiess weren't allowed to bid originally, weren't seen as being capable.
One can only imagine how frustrating that was to Les Thiess.
So Leslie was never afraid to take on some opportunity which might not necessarily have been done before. He himself really had a personal relationship with Sir William Hudson, the Snowy Mountains Commissioner, who had an interest to see an Australian construction capability established.
Against all the odds, on the 1st of May 1958, Thiess was selected as the first Australian company to win a construction contract on the Snowy scheme.
It was quite incredible, really. It was a small Australian company taking on the might of overseas contractors like the Americans, the French, the Norwegians. To have the intestinal fortitude that they had back then to take on the big jobs in the Snowy was quite something.
I think there were over 100 different nationalities all massed together to take on an enormous engineering feat.
One of the stories goes back to the Telebingo days. Some extreme wet weather floated all the log and debris down the river and choked up this tunnel that would divert the water away from the dam area. So it was becoming a bit critical, but I believe Bert Thiess went down there with a couple of sticks of gelignite and fixed that straight away.
Already dubbed the men who eat rocks and stones, they proved the journos right, breaking world records for tunnel driving on their first contract. Among those celebrating was a young Ken Thiess, the family's first engineer and Bert's eldest son. Weeks of rain, sleet and snow couldn't dampen Ken's spirits, excited to dig his teeth into his first major project. It was the morning of the 28th of May when Ken set out to survey the steep slope, and a freak incident occurred.
The son of Bert, Ken, lost his life, the only engineer in the Thiess family.
With the slip of a log, a promising young career ended.
You know, you see photos back in the Snowy Mountains days with safety first above the tunnel. I guess despite that commitment to safety, there were triumphs and there were tragedies, clearly. It must have had a significant impact on the family, but I guess in true spirit, kept moving forward. And to this day, we continue that commitment to safety and come a long way.
The 8th Army was instrumental in rebuilding Japan, and a vital work this was because it soon became apparent that we needed them.
Around the same time as the Thiess family empire went public in 1958, the Japanese empire was emerging as a new powerhouse of the industrial world.
To me, it's astounding to think that so quickly after the end of the Second World War, when naturally the sentiment in Australia would have been to not provide any assistance to the Japanese, here is Les Thiess looking for those opportunities.
After meeting the manager of Mitsui Coal Division, Les quickly discovered their insatiable appetite for high-quality coking coal. By the late 1960s, the Kayanga Maura coalfield, operated by Thiess Peabody Mitsui joint venture, had become Japan's biggest individual supplier.
You know, you fly over the Bowen Basin today and the amount of coal mining and infrastructure that's in that region, you know, Thiess was, you know, at the very forefront of that.
Les wasn't finished in Japan just yet. The brothers had been using Toyota's Land Cruisers for years and found them to be the perfect workhorse for Australia's harsh terrain. Having met with the chairman of the Toyota Motor Company, Les was presented with another huge opportunity for Thiess to become Toyota's distributor down under. But there was a problem. Although Les saw the potential of the off-road vehicles, the Thiess board was unconvinced. As usual, Les would not let an opportunity go begging and funded the first fleet of vehicles with $40,000 of his own money. It was a small price to pay.
The job of distributing Toyota vehicles over this vast, colourful area is handled 1,000 miles north of Alice Springs, in Darwin, capital city of the Northern Territory. The problem of distance facing Thiess sales is illustrated by the fact that it's as far from London to Moscow as it is from Darwin to the island state of Tasmania.
If you listen to some of the stories and you read the old literature on the family, they took a stand that most others wouldn't be willing to. They brought Toyota into the country.
You know, they had the vision to do something different at that stage, and you know, what was seen as probably a risky venture at that time to import all these vehicles, but they went ahead and did it anyway.
Within 5 years, the newly formed Thiess Toyota was racking up sales of over $200 million per year. And of course, Toyota went on to become one of our nation's favourite brands.
I take pleasure in presenting to you Toyota in Australia.
It was this unwavering optimism that propelled Thiess forward into the 70s. The company had risen to become an international success story, and Les became Sir Les. With coal now the go-to resource worldwide, and some of the nation's largest companies looking to invest, Thiess suddenly found itself under the watchful eye of the business world.
I first joined Thiess Holdings in the mid-70s. It was a very dynamic, very successful company, very entrepreneurial driven by Thiess and his brothers, of course, going through enormous growth, which of course made them the target of the CSR takeover.
On the 23rd of October 1979, Thiess received a call. It was a representative from CSR, a former sugar refining company turned corporate conglomerate. They were looking to diversify into energy and had their sights set on Thiess. That same day, CSR made an aggressive play aimed at taking a controlling stake in the company. Thiess now faced the battle of his life.
CSR actually made a bid for the shares, double the value. Obviously, it was a landslide win for everybody that had any shares.
CSR's attractive offer had lured many, including one of Thiess's largest shareholders, AMP. Shell soon followed, despite a long-standing gentleman's agreement with Thiess not to sell. It would seem that corporate loyalties were a thing of the past. It was only a matter of weeks before Thiess received the bitter news that he'd lost control of the very company he and his brothers had built. With CSR as majority shareholder, the company landscape was about to shift dramatically.
The first thing that CSR did together with Shell was to hive off all of the mining assets.
Floats came on the site, the better equipment was packed up and was all taken off to the mine sites.
We had some equipment, some plant, but it was all pretty much run down. It was the stuff that the others didn't want.
They began to sell off divisions as if for scrap, including the successful construction arm. Thiess jumped at the opportunity and partnered with Westfield and Hochtief to buy a slice back. And Thiess Contractors was born. Thiess had clinched a bargain, and more importantly, the trusted Thiess name would remain. Meanwhile, Watkins Consolidated, a family-run construction business from Brisbane, was fighting off a hostile company takeover of its own. Desperate to see his father's business go on, Greg Watkins approached Thiess. It was a difficult decision, but compelled to help, Thiess left Thiess Contractors to form Thiess Watkins. Success quickly followed, and in their first year of partnership, his new venture recorded a $150 million turnover. By now, everyone wanted a piece of the Thiess name, none more so than Leighton Holdings, who embarked on a complex bid to buy Thiess Contractors. Shareholder Westfield was happy to sell, but Hochtief stuck to their guns. In exchange for their stake in Thiess Contractors, they demanded a 40% share of Leighton Holdings itself. The deal was done, and although Thiess Contractors was now 100% owned by Leighton Holdings, it was perhaps Hochtief who emerged as true victors. The corporate battlefield had now cleared. But in its wake, Thiess began to wind down his interests, which eventually saw the demise of Thiess Watkins, and the morale at Thiess Contractors plummeted to an all-time low.
The organisation obviously felt battered and bruised after the takeover and then the various iterations of Sir Leslie being involved and then stepping back.
To add insult to injury, the company tabled a $5.5 million loss. The business had yet another fight on its hands.
We were struggling a little bit. Martin Albrecht, who eventually went on to become the MD and the chairman, he was parachuted in.
I think it was a momentous day of May the 30th or something like that when I took on the role as CEO. And then the fun began.
Martin just said to everybody, well, this is it. Either we all go down together or we all go up together.
The term blue blood would become the war cry for a company fighting to get back on its feet.
Well, blue blood, I guess, just came from our colours originally, and it meant different things to different people.
It's the common bond that binds all the people together.
From almost my first day in the company, it felt like home. I think when you get that feeling, when you feel you're part of the place, you've got blue blood, whether you've been here for a day or 20 years, doesn't matter.
By 1986, there was a growing sense that blue blood would prevail.
I don't think there was ever some sort of defining rallying speech. I think there was a consistent message that as long as we really put our shoulder to the wheel collectively, this was something that we could accomplish.
Martin was all about people, and he used to come to a project and he would remember everyone's name, which was just mind-boggling.
The rest is bricks and mortar, and steel doesn't mean anything. It's people that make the company. And we all just got in behind him and away we went. It was a good ride.
People had enormous energy. It really wasn't the individual consideration. It was best for the company. And it was quite exciting and rewarding to go through this profit recovery period and come out the other side. In fact, we made a profit in the first 12 months.
You know, we all worked really hard, but at least from where I was sitting, to me the world was at our beck and call.
The company's reputation for complex engineering was untarnished, and slowly the Thiess brand would again start to attract the scale of job they'd become accustomed to on the Snowy. First, the construction of the resort on Hayman Island.
It was the biggest building project that Thiess had ever done at the time. The project value was, $130 million.
It was only in the late 80s that people started looking more towards the cities and developing the infrastructure there.
Today, though, the challenge for Thiess Contractors and its joint venture partners is right here. Construction of the Sydney Harbour Tunnel.
Thiess had a huge involvement in the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, towing 120,000 tonne concrete caissons from Port Kembla up into Sydney Harbour and sinking them into a big trench right underneath the harbour bridge outside Circular Quay. So serious, high-risk work.
But all in all, Thiess was not finding the work it needed to prosper, and perhaps through necessity more so than strategy, it once again cast its eyes to new frontiers.
The focus in the early days was really, how do you stay alive and where can you find opportunities that will sustain the company? And that influenced our decision to re-enter the market in Indonesia.
Timing was good in that we came in at the start of a boom in the resources industries, and we were focused on the coal industry in particular, and the company grew very quickly.
We established first here because we have the relationship with BHP.
BHP said, well, we know what you can do in Australia, but you can't necessarily do it in Indonesia. So we put a fleet of equipment on the water and said, well, we're here.
The company immediately began winning large-scale projects. An impressive 4 out of 6 tenders were won.
Indonesia was terrific. I loved it from the time I got there. It was a challenge. Everyone who was up there was there to achieve something and to build a business. A lot of flexibility about how you did things because, you're 5,000 kilometres away from head office.
In 2000, Thiess signed an alliance agreement with BHP Billiton to take over the mines at Satui and Sanakan. We'd operated there since 1989. One of our first projects was there.
I remember Bruce Munro came down and he dropped a great big bundle of paperwork on the desk and he said, all this equipment now belongs to Thiess, assign unit numbers to the entire fleet.
We took over something like 4,000 people. On Friday they finished with BHP and on Monday they worked for Thiess. The biggest problem was we didn't have enough people to get in there and show them the way we wanted to work.
Indonesia has been very good to Thiess. What makes Thiess so successful there when there are some risks?
I think it's our long-term view and our commitment to the country. There is a low skill level generally. We have about 4,500 employees, many of which have been trained through our own endeavours and our own facility in Balikpapan, which is a world-class facility and accredited to Australian standards.
If you work for Thiess, you work properly and you work hard because company will take care of you.
We been recognized as well by the government of Indonesia, where in Balikpapan we actually got the Education Award.
We've given them something that if they leave Thiess, they can move on with skills that they didn't have.
Back on home soil, the company was also looking for ways to put their skill sets to good use.
Thiess Services came about in the late 80s with the vision to grow an environmental part of Thiess's business.
We just figured the trucking side of that was not much different to running any other bits of plant and equipment.
And from there, introduced the one-arm robots, if you like, which you see on every rubbish truck around Australia now. That was Thiess that brought that innovation.
A 7-year waste contract signalled the start of something new. Telecommunications and remediation contracts soon followed.
Thiess was, I guess, one of the early movers in the remediation business in Australia.
The game changer for Thiess was the awarding of the Olympics in Sydney for 2000 and all the clean-up that had to happen at Homebush, which were quite complex, very hazardous, and really put Thiess Environmental Services' name up in lights.
With each small victory, the company was growing stronger and stronger, and it was time to re-enter the Australian mining market, this time with a whole new outlook.
I guess the next transition for us then was to go from earth-moving contractor to full-service mining.
This innovation and foresight has paved the way for Thiess's emergence as the largest contract coal mine operator in Australasia today, whereby it currently produces some 40 million tonnes of coal each year.
They began offering mine engineering and planning services to major players like BHP, Rio Tinto and MIM, who were struggling to get profit out of their mines.
Thiess was brought in to try and improve productivities and take them to a new level, and did so.
Increasingly, these companies had been shedding engineers.
That opened up opportunities for Thiess then to take on some of those resources and generally offer clients a total solution.
Brains were added to brawn, and Thiess had become the complete package, capable of pulling off incredible engineering feats. Only a few Australian contractors had the size, scope and experience to bid on projects like the Epping to Chatswood rail line, one of the largest publicly funded infrastructure projects in New South Wales history.
Epping to Chatswood was just under $1 billion.
We've gone from building roads through cow paddocks to suddenly building a tunnel right through suburbs and under roads and traffic and all of those things.
From there we've gone on to the Lane Cove tunnels, we've gone to East Link down in Victoria.
We're changing very quickly from a company that known as a dirt mover to the point where we're now the leading provider of urban infrastructure in Australia.
By September 2008, Thiess was well on its way to winning 2 new mega projects.
When I first heard about the air pooling project and the challenges of it, it was massive attraction. It's the sort of project you want to work on.
I remember going back to Sydney one day and telling my boss I'm too young to be sitting in Sydney watching the biggest job in the country get built. I think I'm going to that job.
Airporting had some of the most complex tunnelling methodology known in Australia. So as far as technically, it was an amazing job. As far as logistically, that was probably the biggest challenge on that job.
Myself and my team went days literally without sleeping just to try and get through and get the commitments from parties that we needed. Towards the end of the bidding phase, we had a phenomenon called the GFC.
The phrase global financial crisis was across the pages of every newspaper.
The project director got up and sort of tried to articulate what we were dealing with on Airport Link. He was basically holding a tiger by its tail.
The GFC caught many by surprise.
I mean, we were in a situation where we were behind, on time, and we were behind on financial.
We really messed up, and we know that we messed up. We made maybe 3 or 4 crucial decisions that were not right.
Airport Link and Victorian Desalination Plant were truly amazing projects. They were so amazing that I wish I'd never heard of them.
It was bad. We were losing people. We had never been in a situation where, we lost an MD over it. And I think Bruce coming in really brought some of that old blood back into the leadership, into the company, and really brought us together again.
It was a huge impact on our business, to be frank, it brought us to our knees.
The fact is that everyone sort of rallied around
and just pushed through. They stuck it out.
When I went down there and saw those people and the conditions and what they were dealing with, and week in, week out, it was very, very tough.
You get caught up in the heat of delivering the project, but it's nice to reflect back after we finished that and recognise that was actually a really good outcome.
Financially, not a great success, but in terms of engineering and what was done there in the time, incredible project.
Despite the challenges, Thiess had achieved feats that will endure for generations. And with renewed optimism for the future, the company was able to refocus on projects of national significance.
The world was short of LNG, so suddenly Australia was the next stop in the LNG train.
We've had a strategy for many years to focus on the resource sector.
In Western Australia there was the Gorgon, there was the Wheatstone, there was the Pluto, Icklesona Territory.
I think we're working on every LNG plant in Australia bar one.
Today, Thiess powers into the future, a leader in Australia's resources sector and a key provider of vital infrastructure and services.
The world is changing. There's going to be more than just, concrete and steel.
The best example at the moment is Royal North Shore Hospital. Thiess went into that to design, construct, and then we have Thiess Services who are maintaining that building for the next 25 years.
There are a number of frontiers which we need to achieve the highest standards on. Health, safety, the environment, and community engagement. When companies achieve that social licence through good operations and respect for the communities in which they're working, they will be given a welcome and they'll survive into the future.
You can look back, but don't get lost in the past. Sort of learn from it, but recognise that it's the future that matters.
New stories are being made every day. There are guys out there right now making their own history statements.
The culture, I think, is what defines a company.
We're no longer a family company in the Thiess family sense, the Berts and the Leses and those Thiess, but we are still a family.
There's no doubt in my mind that the foundations of Thiess, of the brothers had, lives on. Absolutely lives on.
They'll certainly be proud of that and proud of what the company's achieved.
And you look at the changes that have occurred in Thiess over that 80 years, and it's just phenomenal.
If we can make the right call on where the market's heading, we've got the talent to deliver pretty well any sort of project we put our minds to.
At the end of the day, we have to create the right environment, which means having the right culture.
It's the common bond that binds all the people together.
We've got a real close-knit team and a vision to make lasting impacts that's going to take us into the future.
The stage is now set for Thiess to take on projects beyond even the wildest dreams of the 5 founding brothers. Today their spirit lives on, stronger than ever. They remain a testament and inspiration to a workforce of nearly 20,000. A legacy of blue blood. 80 years strong.